What he says is that Americans, this is a direct quote, Americans who think they are Christians truly are something else, intensely religious, but devout in the American religion. And so what is the American religion? He says that the American religion centers on the solitary self's direct encounter with God. It's the believer's conviction of possessing an inner divine spark, a sense of freedom that expresses itself in total spiritual solitude. So God is alone, and I am alone, and I can have a relationship with God, and that relationship is in total solitude to anything else that is happening in the world around me. And this, to me, if I were going to put a finger on, okay, what's the number one defining feature of American religion, is that there has to be this experiential conversion. Every single one of these things we're going to talk about is not bad in and of itself. Like, obviously, lots of famous people within the Orthodox Church, beginning with St. Paul, had radical encounters with Jesus Christ, which totally transformed their lives, and they give up everything to follow him. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not normative for everyone, right? It's just not the experience that everybody has. Not everybody has a road to Damascus moment. Well, in American Christianity, everybody is supposed to have a road to Damascus moment.
This is Jonathan Pajot. Welcome to the Symbolic World. Hello, everyone. We are back with Deacon Seraphim Rohlin. We had our last episode talking about folk magic and fairies and America, and we ended hinting at the great American experiment in religion. And so I'm very curious to see where Deacon Seraphim wants to take us today. Please let us know where we're going.
Yeah, so it's been a little while since we've recorded that episode, and since then I've had so many people reach out to me very excited that we had teased talking about Mormonism. So I thought, just to heighten your excitement, I would tease you a little more and maybe not actually get into Mormonism today. We'll see how far we get. But I just want to say that you guys asked for this. You have been begging for Universal History of America in the comments of literally every video since we started the series like 4 years ago. And so you're going to get...
You do it right.
You're going to just like, it's like, okay, you guys really want this. We're going to have to... Because the thing is that it's things that are really distant from us, it's easy to talk about kind of in a more abstract way. And the closer you get to, in this case, my personal lived out experience, and to some extent Jonathan's as well, because although you're not American, you did grow up in a kind of evangelical milieu, which ultimately comes from America. And so when we start talking about American religion, it is kind of relevant to your experience as well in certain ways.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that the crossing over, even in the United States, the crossing over of the French and the English, the relationship between the French Protestants and the English Protestants and the French Catholics, all of these things are part of both the Canadian history and the U.S. history as well. So.
That's right. All right. So what I want to do today is to kind of pick up, not exactly where we left off last time, but to pick up on this theme of folk magic and talk about how this experience worked itself out more in the kind of institutions of the churches in New England in the 17th and 18th centuries. Now, this will actually give us our setup for talking about Mormonism and other revivalist sects which come out of New York and New England in the 19th century.
Yeah, because there's not just Mormonism, you have Christian Science, and you have all of
Christian
these
Science,
weird American,
you have Adventism, you have all these different things.
Yeah.
So, and they all pop up. A lot of those pop up within a decade of each other, within a few miles of each other.
Makes sense.
So something weird is happening there. But to explain what that thing is, what I want to do is talk a little bit, go back to the 17th century, so this would be the 1600s, and talk about the first Great Awakening. So, everything. And by the way, I'm going to be referencing a lot of stuff today from this book right here. I even brought it to show to the class. This is called Kabbalah and the Founding of America. It's the early
On
influence.
the foundation of America.
Yeah, Founding of America. It's a super good book, by the way. It's not like gotcha weird. Anyway, it's really good. It's by Brian Ogren, and he makes a really convincing case, I think. And I'm not going to talk about that immediately, but a lot of the threads that I'm connecting come from him and come from some other authors who are all writing about this 100-year period that is really formative for American religion in a lot of ways. Okay, so you say the fundamental problem that American religion is trying to solve. And I'll use here this term American religion. This comes from Harold Bloom, who wrote his book on American religion, which we'll talk about later. And basically what he says is there is a thing called American religion, which is what almost all Americans have. Like that's their actual religion, regardless of whether they're Mormon or Baptist or Methodist or Pentecostal or what have you. The thing that they actually are is American, and that there is a particular spiritual quality to American religion, which Bloom defines as being fundamentally Gnostic. Now, what he means by Gnostic will be something we talk about, but I just want to just to get people riled up before we go too much further. I'll just mention that Bloom thinks that that's true whether you're a Southern Baptist or a Mormon, and that both of those are forms of the American religion. So let's get into it. So starting around the 17th century, Puritans in New England find themselves wrestling with the central problem of early American Christianity, which is, on the one hand, everybody in America, when the Puritans come to America, you have people talking about, America's going to be this shining city set on a hill, all these different things. And what you have is these different foundations of, in the early colonies, not just of Christian societies, which would be something that they made a big deal about in the circles that I grew up in, but in actually kind of utopianist Christian societies, basically saying real Christianity has never been tried. So we're going to be the ones who do it and who show what real Christianity looks like. Nobody's ever seen it before. We're going to be the first ones to do it. And so we're going to establish these covenant societies. This is what the early colonies are for the most part. We're going to establish these covenant societies in which not only is the civil society and all of its members bound to obedience to Christ and the scriptures via the covenant, but also everyone in the society is a genuine saint. Everyone in the society is regenerate. Everyone in the society has a strong personal relationship with Jesus Christ, to put it in those terms.
Yeah.
So not just people who are living virtuous lives or following the laws, but people who have undergone some kind of dramatic conversion experience which confirms their membership as one of the elect. So on the one hand, you have a societal Christendom, like you would have had in Europe before the Reformation, or even after the Reformation. But on the other hand, you have this, everybody has to have this authentic conversion experience. So basically the way it would work is that a new convert, that is somebody who's had this conversion experience, would share the conversion experience with a congregation. And if the congregation believed that the experience was genuine, they would be allowed to join, which would allow them to partake in the Lord's Supper, but it would also give them the civil privileges that came with church membership, in particular, the right to vote.
Yeah. Okay.
So in Puritan New England, you could only vote if you were also a full member of a church. And then what that would allow also is that your children could then be baptized into the church, which would bring them into the covenant community, but they would not be allowed the full benefits of church membership, which would include communion and being able to vote, until as adults they underwent their own dramatic conversion experience, at which time their kids could be baptized. So you see already,
I hear things that I grew up with so much, but not necessarily the civil part, but like the vision of how it is that you're a Christian, like yeah, everybody had their story, and everybody had to like have their testimony that they tell, and
Right.
it was always kind of the same. How they grew up in a Christian family, but then fell away sometime, and then had this conversion experience. It was like this universal story that everybody kind of had to tell.
Did you ever like make up sins to make your testimony like better?
Um, all I remember from those times is telling the story and having a kind of contempt for myself, because I knew that it wasn't that I was lying, but I knew that I was basically performing.
Yeah, it's performative. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um so the problem was that by the 18th century, these big individual personal conversion experiences have become incredibly rare among second and third and fourth generation colonists. And this means that the churches of this period are full of people who were baptized as infants, but whose own children had not been. And as a result, now they're neither part of the civil covenant nor are they participating members of the congregation. And so suddenly, not only do you not have, everyone's still going to church on Sunday. Well, I say everyone, probably at this point in history, only about 15% of Americans are actually attending church on Sunday. But everybody's at least nominally religious. But because they haven't had this dramatic conversion experience, their own children haven't been baptized. They're not communing members of the local congregation. And therefore, also, they are not voting members of the civil polity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's interesting. I just want to say one thing about that. What's interesting is that you actually realize that although conversion is an important part of the Christian story, you see it in St. Paul and you see it in several characters. Conversion is always an experience of contrast. And so in order to have a very strong conversion experience, you in some ways have to be far away and then have this metanoia. And then it's this awakening moment that brings you in.
right.
But then if you create a Christian society that is following all Christian values and you grew up completely in those values, it becomes harder and harder to have that like strong conversion experience, because you're not like tempted by the prostitute, or whatever you're tempted by, because she's not there. Like the sins aren't there or aren't as available. And so the conversion experience must be a lot harder. It's just super interesting to realize that it causes this problem.
Let me talk to my own team for a second. Those of us who are converts to Orthodoxy, one of the big challenges is how do we kind of get over this?
Yeah.
Because if we're going to raise children, and I have, 6 cradle Orthodox Christians living in my house, right? My kids have grown up in the Orthodox Church as far as they know this, and the thing is like they encounter other forms of Christianity all the time because we have a lot of non-Orthodox family members. And so we constantly have discussions about these things, but none of them have ever had that big, partly just because they're all young. But the thing is that the big conversion experience, that being young was not a bar to that. Like you could have somebody who is, becomes born again when they're 3 years old, like I did. So you can have, So anyway, it's the thing I'm trying to say is that you're right. Conversion itself is a kind of lateral movement. And the thing that we've got to figure out how to do as Orthodox Christians, converts, or, even if you're converting to, some other more older, more traditional form of Christianity, is actually kind of move beyond the conversion story and figure out now what is it actually, how do I change that lateral movement into horizontal movement and start moving deeper and deeper, or farther up the mountain, whichever way you want to talk about it. How do I start moving deeper into this faith and kind of show what that looks like? You can always keep converting, but that conversion has to, at some point, it has to stop being out of something into something else and just converting deeper and deeper and actually finding a deeper than surface level repentance, you could say. All right. So we have this problem. Lots of people aren't full members of the church, and therefore they also can't participate in a lot of the aspects of the civil covenant. So there are basically 2 schools of thought about how to address this. The more liberal side, which eventually becomes Unitarian Congregationalism, pushed for something by its detractors that was called by its detractors called the halfway covenant. And the halfway covenant was this idea that we can, that baptized but unconverted members could have their children baptized, and therefore they would have some of the civil privileges of church membership, but not its full benefits. And there were several crises in the Massachusetts colony, several of which culminated in the Salem witch trials, and that's all related to this stuff. I'm just going to keep teasing this. Several crises in the Massachusetts colony caused a lot of people to believe that actually God was punishing them for failing to bring society into the covenant. And so as a result, about 4 out of 5 New England churches adopt the halfway covenant. Now, the most ardent opponent of the halfway covenant is a guy named Jonathan Edwards of Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God fame.
Heard that name before.
Yeah. Okay. In the circles I grew up in, he's a
He's
big
the
deal.
guy.
He's the guy. He's a big deal. So he's a very ardent opponent of the idea of the halfway covenant. He's a hardliner. He's the leading the kind of the leading light, if you will, in a revivalist flavor of Calvinism that's often referred to as the New Light, which stresses the necessity of a dramatic and physically intense. Like you have to be like feeling something physical.
Yeah, you have to cry.
Yeah, like cry, vomit. Sometimes also like have like crazy physical, like what we would call nowadays like being slain in the spirit, those kinds of things. You have to have this physically intense conversion experience in order to know that you are one of the elect. Now, the New Light basically emphasizes this personal conversion experience as being more important than the old light. So that obviously if there's a new light, there's an old light. The old light is that idea of the theocratic covenant community, which is already kind of not working, right? So as I mentioned, Edwards, he's the leading voice in the new light, or one of them. And this is how we should understand the context, for instance, of the text of the sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And also what most people don't know is the occasion on which he preached this. So basically what was going on was we have all these congregations that have basically resisted conversion, like full conversion, like, you know. So what we need to do is send kind of like a specialist in, you know, like I know a guy, you know, a man with a very special set of skills who can whip people into a frenzy basically and help them kind of convert. And the thing is that when one of the odd things about this kind of revivalist focus in American Christianity, which is still very much what I grew up with, is that you're always preaching to people who are already Christians.
Yeah.
Like you're going to the church, you're preaching to people who are in the pews every Sunday, and what you're trying to do is kind of like warm them up again, right? So he'd been asked to come and preach to this particular congregation where almost everybody was baptized because it had.
Are they Christian though? Like, are they? You know, are they really?
I mean, if they haven't had this,
it's like that's the thing. Is like, are you really? Like, are you really? And so I keep that to preaching because I don't know. Maybe there's one of you that hasn't, you know, really like isn't really a Christian.
Maybe there's someone here who's never put a stake in the ground and said, right. "Lord, I give my life to you on this state." And if you haven't done that, listen. If you want to play this game, Jonathan, I can. I still remember the lingo. So.
Oh man.
So he's asked to come and preach to this congregation where almost everybody's baptized because they have a very low number of full members. That is, people who have undergone this dramatic experience. And they'd already sent 2 or 3 other preachers there and they couldn't get the job done. So now they're like, all right, it's time to bring the big guns. And Jonathan Edwards' job. And by the way, I have to say, I still like Jonathan Edwards. Like when I'm talking about people like him or David Brainerd, who I might talk about a little bit later, I still really have a lot of affection for these men. I mean, I read a lot of their writings as a young man. I read their biographies, and Edwards had a really strong mystical side. He believed in something kind of like theosis. And so he's not really actually a super fire and brimstone guy, except, you know, like it's one of the tools in his toolbox. Anyway, I just want to say, like, I'm not an Edwards hater for. You know, I still kind of have a sort of affection for this guy. But the whole point of the sermon that he's preaching is literally to scare the hell out of these. I mean that literally, as out of all these baptized but unconverted people.
Yeah.
To give them the conversion experience necessary to become real Christians. And that's the
This
context
is
for.
also all bound up in the civil participations.
That's
still,
right.
Like,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So that's the thing that we cannot forget here,
Yeah.
is that part of the reason it is a societal problem is because a lot of things are going wrong in New England. I mentioned the Salem witch trials, right? Well, there's been this practice of folk magic. There's been this practice of various kinds of magic, some of them practiced by everybody, including the people conducting the Salem witch trials, and some of them like much, much more sinister. Like, I don't believe everybody in the Salem witch trials was necessarily falsely accused. It's a really interesting period. That's a whole video by itself, maybe. But the point is that, things have been going wrong. There's this kind of weird underbelly within the world of the Puritans, where it's very clear that the thing that they set out to do, which is to have this totally theocratic society in which everybody is genuinely converted, just hasn't worked. There was, you had the Salem witch trials, but also you just have the fact that now, by the time of the Great Awakening, only about 15% of people go to church on Sunday. You have the fact that you have these churches that are full of people who are baptized but not converted, and therefore their kids also are unbaptized, and just all these different issues, right? So this is the context for this sermon, "Sinners in the Hands of the Angry God." Is we've got to kind of get people through this idea of having this. They have to have this dramatic conversion experience. And this, to me, if I were going to put a finger on, okay, what's the number one defining feature of American religion? And this is also what Harold Bloom would say, is that there has to be this experiential conversion, right? Now, every single one of these things we're going to talk about is not bad in and of itself. Like, obviously, lots of famous people within the Orthodox Church, beginning with St. Paul and the other apostles, had radical encounters with Jesus Christ, which totally transformed their lives, and they give up everything to follow him. So there's nothing wrong with that. But what is the thing is that it's just not normative for everyone, right? It's just not the experience that everybody has. Not everybody has a road to Damascus moment. Well, in American Christianity, everybody is supposed to have a road to Damascus moment. It's hard. I always felt a little, as somebody who converted, when I was quite young, I was 3 years old when I said the prayer and asked Jesus into my heart, all those things. It was always hard because I felt like, I didn't have any big sins that I kind of converted from. And so then what you do is you start rededicating your life, or I had friends who just decided in their teens, I wasn't really saved, but now I'm saved, and just like you kind of need that big moment. You need that big thing that you can kind of look back to and say, hey, this is the big moment where I converted. So this constant push for these big conversion experiences in New England and in New England and in New York, especially in the what is sometimes called the burned over district, which is what I'm going to talk about next. This push is related to all the stuff that we were talking about last time. It's related to folk magic. One of the big ideas that you find in the second generation of the magisterial Reformation is this interest in alchemy, and the idea of alchemy as the conversion of the soul. Now that we've moved away mostly from a more sacramental approach to salvation, alchemy becomes this kind of metaphorical. All right, we're not changing, base matter into gold, but you can change the base matter of your heart into gold, and so this idea of like the total conversion of the soul. And all of that stuff is just kind of bubbling up. There's lots and lots of examples that we talked about last time. All this stuff is kind of bubbling up in Puritan New England. It's bubbling up in upstate New York. And in the early 19th century, this leads to something called the burned over district in western and central New York State that becomes, this is really where all of these big movements come out of. So there's several things that are going on here. One is the survival of all these different forms of folk magic and folk religion, a big part of which is the idea of seers, the idea of visionaries, the idea of you could be someone who has these kind of visionary experiences and becomes the portal of wisdom to your community. And again, that is a real thing, but it is also, at least in our tradition, there's a tremendous amount of sobriety around these kinds of experiences because it is so easy without discernment, so easy to be led astray.
And this is something people struggle to understand. I want to say just one thing about this is that people in the Orthodox tradition, there is an attitude of suspicion towards all of these things, like all of these experiences of the visions, of the miracles, and all of that. And people think that it's in some ways, I've heard people say, oh, well, you're kind of dampening the spirit or whatever, that kind of language. But in fact, our tradition is full of them, though. Our tradition is full of people who have foresight, people who do miracles. It's full of it. It's just that there's also a critical apparatus which is there to prevent the kind of excesses and the kind of charlatanry or just emotional, or kind of people who just get caught up in their own experiences. And so it's a funny it's a funny paradox when people look at it. On the one hand, there's a suspicion to it, and on the other hand, the tradition is full of these kinds of realities. So
yeah, I mean, so the common advice is, if you're praying the Jesus prayer or something like that, and you have some kind of a vision or visionary ecstatic experience, it's just to ignore it. Act like nothing happened until it happens 3 times. If it happens 3 times, then you go and talk to your spiritual father. And by the way, the thing that's implied by this advice is that you have a spiritual father, somebody who cares for you, cares about your soul, is themselves much more spiritually experienced than you are, and also has the authority to tell you, yeah, stop messing around with that stuff, or no, this is really from God. You should follow this up. And that aspect of obedience is one of the things that is intentionally missing from the American religion. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about Bloom in a second. So, is the burned over district. And in the burned over district, by the way, this title was popularized by Charles Finney. I don't know if you know that name. Another big person in my background, Charles Finney. In 1876, he writes, his autobiography is published after his death. Finney was the most famous revivalist preacher from the era. He was a former lawyer who approached, by the way, it's just always sort of bad news whenever a lawyer starts doing theology. Like, historically speaking, it has not been good. He's a former lawyer, and his approach to preaching was to approach his congregation as he would a jury. So what he was trying to do was to get you to come to a certain verdict, right? And so he would preach these very emotional, direct sermons that would urge like these immediate decisions for Christ. This is the guy who literally invented the altar call.
Yeah,
right?
wow.
Yeah. So by the time he wrote his memoirs, he said that this region had been so thoroughly and so repeatedly evangelized that there was no spiritual fuel left. There was no unconverted population left to be converted, right? So no fuel left to burn, the burned over district, right? That's the idea. Because they'd had these waves after waves after waves after waves of religious enthusiasm. By the way, this is still a really weird region in the present times, religiously speaking. But there were these waves after waves of religious enthusiasm. You had revivals, but you also had new religions, new cults, new sects, new spreading, and also spiritualism. And there were more towns experiencing these kind of big revivals between 1816 and 1821 than in any previous period of New York history. And the big kind of climax is between 1825 and 1837. So those are the dates that we're looking at. And of course, that's right when Mormonism pops up. That's also right when a lot of these other movements pop up. Now, the other big thing that's going on in the area right now, because these things never happen in a vacuum, is of course the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825, which hugely transforms the region overnight, right? It goes from being kind of like an isolated frontier to becoming, this huge corridor of commerce and migration. It's bringing in rapid growth. It's bringing in lots of new money. It's also bringing in all the stresses that come with that, social dislocation, a constant flow of new ideas and new people. And so it goes from being kind of the edge to being actually just this threshold space, this liminal space. It's not the settled world of like colonial New England. It's not the wild frontier. And in this place, we have several movements that are all popping up at once. And they all basically have in common a heavy focus on a conversion experience, on some integration of folk magic or spiritualism, and also the usually this idea that what we need to do is to found certain utopian certain utopian societies to either bring about or to wait for the second coming. So Mormonism in 1830, Millerism in the 1840s. So this is William Miller's revival preaching of the imminent second coming, and this is going to be the thing that eventually Adventism will develop out of. In 1848, this is when you have the big spiritualist movement pop up. In the same part in Hydesville, New York, you have the Fox sisters, and they're the ones that start doing the seances, like with the table tapping and all this stuff. You have the Shakers, who establish a commune in central New York in 1826, and there's a big Shaker revival in 1837. You have the Anita community with John Humphrey Noyes, who tries to establish like just like a utopianist commune there. And then, of course, you also have lots of stuff going on with the Masons, a lot of pro-Mason stuff, also a lot of anti-Mason stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff going on with the Masons during all of this period. And a lot of the times when certain groups, obviously Joseph Smith, I think this is pretty well documented, but when certain groups would bring ritual components into the things that they were doing, they would often kind of ape the rituals of the Masonic temple. So let me just talk a little bit about a couple of these movements. So there's the Millerite movement, and something called famously the Great Disappointment. So this is Miller.
The second coming prophecy that didn't come true?
Yeah, it's the first big famous one. Obviously, we have a bunch of them. There was one just the other day.
Just a few months ago.
Just the other day, like I was getting on an airplane and somebody was like, "Oh, at least you'll be a little closer to the sky when the rapture happens." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm Orthodox, so I'll just get stuck in a toll house." But anyway, probably the toll house of making jokes about toll houses. But
there
anyway.
You go.
Yeah, so there's a guy named William Miller, and he's like this millennialist in the old sense, like Achilles, in the sense that he's trying to bring about the second coming, or the second coming is definitely going to happen really, really soon. And so he reads Daniel chapter 8 and begins this. It's not really original to him, but he's the first American to really do this thing of reading the Bible and reading the book of Daniel closely and reading the book of Revelation closely, very much like the people that I grew up with, and trying to like work out the exact date.
Map it out.
And in his case, he puts this mathematical calculation together to say that the second coming of Christ is going to happen in January 1843, and then March 21st, and then March 21st, 1844. And when that date passes without incident, we have the Great Disappointment. And all of this leads to kind of, they start to try to figure all of this stuff out. And I've got a buddy who's definitely going to watch this, who knows a lot more about the history of Adventism than I do. So he's been helping me figure some of this out. But there's this idea that there's this a special kind of judgment. I suddenly blanked out. I had the term in my head a moment ago and I suddenly blanked out on it. But that the thing that was actually prophesied is that on
like
this
an intermediary judgment. It was not the final judgment.
Yeah, it's like God has entered, Christ has entered into the holy place, and now he's he's beginning the final judgment there, and that's actually the thing. And so that's what Adventism, Seventh-day Adventism, kind of comes out of. Now, there's
Really?
also so the thing that you're being judged on is Sabbath keeping. The thing you're being judged on is like the other things that are kind of important in Adventism.
Right. I
I'm
always
sure
thought
somebody in the
Adventism was
comments.
mostly a kind of Judaizing of Christianity,
So
but I didn't know it had to do with this.
it comes out of that. It does come out of that. I mean, there were Sabbatarian Baptists, there were other Sabbatarian groups before this. I mean, that Judaizing thing. I keep teasing the Kabbalah thing, and I think we're going to run out of time
I
today
know
to
you
cover
showed
it.
the cover of a book with the word Kabbalah on it, and now we haven't talked
So,
about Kabbalah at all.
yeah. Okay. Well, so maybe this would be a good time to kind of address this a little bit. So I'm not going to like do a whole like what even is Kabbalah video, because I just think that would not be helpful for a lot of people. But I mean, also like all this stuff is on the internet now. Like you can just look this stuff up. But the thing that I'm particularly interested in is the ways that the Puritans were interested in it. So, for instance, Cotton Mather and his father Increase Mather, who are like the big Puritans, connected to the Salem witch trials, connected to like a ton of the major like puritanical, Christian writings, mystical writings, and things like that. When you think of Puritans as being like austere biblical literalists who are like super hostile to mysticism and esoteric speculation, that's just simply not the case. The Mathers were hugely interested and very, I think, deeply influenced by Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, and this is not just a peripheral interest for them. It shapes their understanding of America's providential role, and also their approach to two very important things. One is eschatology, and the other is the conversion of the Jews. So around the late 1680s, this is according to Ogren's book, Puritan leaders began developing a messianic theology that is based largely on on the conversion of the Jews. And there's actually a Jewish convert who's part of all of this, the first Jewish convert in America. And when he converts to Christianity, he brings Kabbalah with him and introduces all of these major players, introduces them to Jewish mysticism. And so there's this belief, and this will kind of just tease our next video a little bit. There's this belief that Jewish mystical wisdom, properly understood through Puritan Christian eyes, is going to play a role in the end times and in the establishment of God's kingdom on the earth. Mm-hmm. And so there's a Kabbalistic manuscript that is attributed to George Keith. He was a Quaker who was really into Kabbalah. It makes its way from Pennsylvania to the Mather family library in Massachusetts. And Cotton Mather engaged in an extended correspondence with Keith, and kind of trying to, and it starts sort of creating this synthesis of Puritan Congregationalism and Quakerism and Kabbalah. And the thing that they're looking for, the thing that they're sort of pushing for, is a mystical, a series of mystical principles, which will ultimately lead to the founding of a fully Christian nation that will then usher in the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. And so this, for the Puritans, this is a big part. And of course, like along with this, there's these weird like folk magic and ritual aspects too. And some of that has some of that, all of this stuff bubbles up in weird places. The thing about folk magic, the thing about like any kind of illicit, your sub rosa, let's say, ritual aspects, whether it's to Kabbalah or Masonism or to something else, is that they tend to, they bleed together so much. Sometimes it's hard to like pick a piece out and say where this piece came from, because they just sort of like, there's this constant kind of exchange that's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's, if you look at things like voodoo, or if you look at
Yeah, I mean, a lot
And
of this stuff heavily
gypsy
influenced.
practices, they're extremely confused. Like it's
Yeah.
basically like mixture, and they just pick things and throw them in, and they have these ritual practices that are not pure in any way. They're basically, it's like it's a bunch of, it looks like some of it is Christian, some of it is Jewish, some of it is who knows Indian, who knows where it comes from. It's like
We
this,
talked about Appalachian granny magic last time, and
yeah,
one of the things that's actually really big in that context is statues of the Virgin Mary, which are used
yeah.
in ritual ways for lots of things, even those people are not
They're not
Roman
Catholic.
Catholics. Yeah, it's so interesting. Um, so there's that kind of lower aspect of it, and then there's also the higher, more philosophical aspect, which is focused on this idea that America, let's say that that America is supposed to have a messianic role in the end times, in the bringing about of the kingdom of God on earth, and that this is involved within Jewish mysticism to some extent.
Uh-huh.
And I know you've been talking a lot about the post World War II consensus. The post World War II consensus that was established, after the Second World War, and all the things that come with it, is, among other things, it's more complicated than this, but one of the main things it is, I mean, if you just think about the fact that the post World War II consensus is only possible and has only been possible because of American military power in the world, American industry that's been aimed at maintaining that consensus. The post World War II consensus is aimed at this idea that America has an eschatological role in the world, right? And therefore, what happens in other parts of the world ultimately is our business. We're a force for good. And this is not just the MAGA people, and this is not just, like crazy religious people who believe this. I have friends who are liberals. I have friends who are self-identifying neocons who don't want anything to do with all of that. But basically, this idea of America as the predominant force for good in history is something that they would unashamedly say, yeah, that's absolutely what they believe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's give the devil its due. Like,
yeah, for sure.
We're doing we're doing the Commedia now. Like we're finishing up with Paradiso, and Dante, amongst other people, had this idea of the Western movement of authority and power, basically, that in some ways that authority and power moved like the heavens, moved from the east to the west, and that in some ways Rome was this kind of image of this movement from Babylon, and Babylon to the Greeks, all to the Romans, and he even complained because of Constantine's changing of the capital to Constantinople, because he was saying it was actually going against nature, because the movement is supposed to move from east to west.
That's right.
And so there's like an intuitive thing that would happen if, imagine, the Western people discovered this massive land to the west of them that they began to inhabit and to colonize and to create in their image, that there would almost be like a thrust to believe that this is some kind of eschatological happening, that we're creating a kind of kingdom that will be related to the end of the day, to the end of the world, to the to the Western end of this cycle, something like that.
So I'll do you one more.
You do one more, right?
Because I've been thinking about exactly this thing. Is like we're teaching through Dante, finishing on our series, and obviously I love Dante. I also love American history. Like I want it to be clear that when I'm talking about these things, I'm just talking about connections that I see. I'm talking about stuff that's interesting to me. This is the country that I live in. You just gotta see it for what it is,
Mm-hmm.
But all of these people, all of your Puritans, all of your revivalists, your 19th century revivalists, your Joseph Smiths and your Charles Finneys and all these guys, they would have been Franciscans in Dante's time. Like they would have. Like if you just look at there's this weird, okay, so for people who have not been following along with the Dante coverage here on the Symbolic World, where we accurately cover events that happened 1,000 years ago, It's the only way you can be sure it's not fake news, is we've really had time to vet things. But anyway, if you've not been following along with the Dante coverage, right? So in the background of the Divine Comedy, and then also, by the way, in the background of Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, which we ended up talking about a little bit last class, there are these movements, these revivalistic movements, which will eventually kind of result in the Reformation, and in the more, especially the more radical strains of the Reformation. But hundreds of years before that, they are resulting in both groups like the Albigensians, these heretical groups, but also groups within the Roman Catholic Church, like the Franciscans, and especially like the spiritual Franciscans, and anyway, all these different groups. And what they're defined by is a strong sense of apocalypticism, a strong sense that we need to establish the kingdom of God now because Christ is returning soon. So the more heretical groups, they're going off and living in communes. I mean, it's not at all hard to imagine them doing this in New England, where they're going off and they're living in these communes and they're having these ecstatic religious experiences and they're waiting for the second coming. Within the church, though, also there's this idea that, well, we had the kingdom of God and it was the empire, but now it's falling apart. And so we have to reestablish it. And the way for us to reestablish it, and Dante is definitely kind of this party, is for the church is for the Roman Catholic Church to actually embrace poverty, to abandon all of the pomp and the flavor of civil power that the Western Church had accrued to itself throughout the late Middle Ages, and instead, bring in a strong emperor who, for Dante, is this messianic figure who's going to come in and kind of reestablish, settle all the squabbles in Italy and reestablish the kingdom of God in Europe. So these patterns repeat, and the thing that's interesting to me is the way that they, I think that they do herald. And by the way, you'll find this pattern everywhere. You'll find it in late medieval Russia. You'll find it in the Far East. You'll find it everywhere, because this is what it looks like when an age is coming to an end. Is that you have these things that pop up, and there's these weird revivalist movements. Yeah. What's unique, you could say, about America is that they have been so successful. Typically speaking, they are not, because typically speaking,
they peter out, like they just fizzle out, or they get crushed or whatever.
They fizzle out for the very simple reason that they by nature they do not have the institutional framework to last. So what's weird and interesting to me about these American religious movements, which have all of these apocalyptic flavors to them, and they have all the same kind of things that you would find in the late Middle Ages, in these little, these sects, these groups on the fringe, is that so many of them have continued to be successful. I mean, ultimately, the charismatic movement, Pentecostalism, also comes from this region. Mormonism.
Jehovah's Witnesses are a little later, right? But
yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses are a different thing. They're a little bit later. Yeah. But and this is the thing that Harold Bloom is really interested in. This is the thing he's really interested in his work on American religion. Mm-hmm. So what he says, now this is Harold Bloom. It's not Deacon Seraphim necessarily saying this. This is Harold Bloom. But he says that, who by the way, Harold Bloom is a non-practicing Jew, so he's not himself religious. He's Jewish. He's secular. Although he said that if he'd been born in the 1830s and if he was not Jewish, he would have become Mormon, because he thought Mormonism was the most perfect American religion. And so when he describes these things to Bloom, these are all good things. Bloom likes American religion. This is not, it's not
criticizing.
He's not criticizing, or if he's doing critique, he's doing it like in an academic sense. He's not doing it in a way to like cast aspersions. So what he says is that Americans, this is a direct quote, Americans who think they are Christians truly are something else, intensely religious, but devout in the American religion. And so what is the American religion? He says that the American religion centers on the solitary self's direct encounter with God. Mm-hmm. It's the believer's conviction of possessing an inner divine spark, a sense of freedom that expresses itself in total spiritual solitude. So God is alone, and I am alone, and I can have a relationship with God, and that relationship is in total solitude to anything else that is happening in the world around me. It is not a it's not a so obviously there's a communal or covenantal aspect to Christianity that obviously the Puritans believed in, but as that starts to fall apart and they realize that just the covenantal aspect is not enough to kind of keep things together, there's this shift that happens. That's why I started this video where I did. There's the shift that happens towards this more like experiential. You need this big physical conversion experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's fundamentally Gnostic. What does he mean by this? Well, when Bloom says it's fundamentally Gnostic, what he means is he's not necessarily talking about like ancient Valentinian or Sethian Gnosticism, but rather what he sees these structural and theological parallels between them. So first of all, this idea that we contain a divine spark. Obviously, there's something like this in Christianity, but that it can only be actualized in the solitary and transcendent self. If you think of somebody like Ralph Waldo Emerson, William James, Walt Whitman, right? This idea of self-reliance, right? Which is the great American virtue, right? The fact that I can just kind of figure this out on myself. And listen, Americans have gotten a lot done. Like, at least in a pragmatic standpoint, some of the stuff really works. But so self-reliance, the belief that that my soul stands apart from the world, right? That there's something like the real me that can be actualized and can be known. And if I can actualize the real me, then I can truly be free. And so the American, Bloom says, finds God in herself or himself only after finding the freedom to know God by experiencing a total inward solitude. So you can only know God basically on your own terms. The experience cannot ultimately be mediated through anyone else. A freedom, he describes it as a wildness. It's being liberated from other selves. It's also being liberated from the created world. This idea that, obviously Mormonism has something in it, kind of like the pre-existence of souls, in which you're not even actually sort of part of the creation. Like you came from somewhere else. And that one of the things that allows us to do, just to tick off the other half of the people who are watching this video, is it allows us to look at the created world around us in a very instrumental or mechanistic way, and to basically say, all of this is for me to use for things.
Mm-hmm.
It's why the idea of even like a kind of environmental conservatism is a very hard sell for Americans, because ultimately these things are what? Natural resources. They're resources, and we can only think about them in terms of being resources, not in some other terms. So Bloom says a lot more about this, but we're coming up on a hard stop here, and I wanted to kind of so that's the teaser. I promised to actually talk about Joseph Smith next time. I promised to actually talk some more about also the sacred geography of the American landscape next time, because America has its own actual sacred geography as well that plays into all these movements and how they move west over the 19th century. But do you have anything?
We do have to talk about we do have to talk about Freemasonry, because the question of how Kabbalah reaches the Puritans and reaches these Protestant sects. My intuition has always been that it has been through Freemasonry, because Freemasonry was even in England, it was a non-Christian, let's say, community, the spiritual community, and therefore Jews were allowed in Freemasonry and were quite prominent in the early in the early lodges. And so, I mean, I think that's, because the question is like, how did people even access these texts? Like, the Zohar is impenetrable, right? Luria is hard to read. All of these things are difficult to access.
In the case of the Mathers, right? They got it. They actually got these texts from people who, like, there's a chain of transmission, and we know this because like the books were in their libraries. It's easy to go and take a look at this. But as far as like how the stuff, how does it make the time skip, 200 years later to somebody like Joseph Smith? I think the Masons are a big part of that. And I also think that the folk magic aspect of it is also a way a lot of this is passed down. I'm not proposing, for instance, that somebody during, the 1830s who is part of one of these big, mystical revivalistic sects. I'm not proposing that all of them had like direct access to Kabbalah or could have explained all of the major tenets of it, but it's more the idea that these things are just kind of in the air, they're in the water, they're surviving in these various. We talked a lot last time about various kinds of folk magic and things that people practiced, and a lot of those have these little ritual elements that are basically broken references to things in Kabbalah or things in medieval alchemy or things in other systems, things like hoodoo and stuff like that. So
Yeah, because there's also a way out from Spain, like in the sense that
right.
if especially when it becomes mixed with things like alchemy and Kabbalah, then for sure there must have been contacts with some of the conversos, the people that left Spain. Some went to England. Like there's all of these connections.
All of the stuff is very, like, it's so hard to talk about one thing individually. Like you really have to always be like talking about a soup that has like thick bits and thin bits, and like the thin parts are like the philosophy, which can influence things in one way, but then there's also like the chunks of ritual that are just kind of floating around in the
like
soup.
The magic, the actual charms and talismans and all
and
this
demonology
stuff,
and talismans and all this stuff.
And all that stuff gets absorbed at the bottom, like it gets absorbed by the old ladies and like the healers in the villages and all this stuff.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, we got a lot more to talk about. Unfortunately, we have a hard stop today. I really am sorry, guys. I'm not just trying to like tease you guys, actually. But we'll look forward in our next video to digging a little bit more into some of this stuff. And the other thing that I want to say is just acknowledge that we're really just looking at one particular strain of the American religion right now. I know, like living in the Southwest, I'm quite aware that there's also another kind of enchanted America that has to do with the Spanish missions and Our Lady of Guadalupe and all these things. I know this because I live around it. I live across the street from it in many cases. I've got neighbors that have Our Lady of Guadalupe shrines out in their yards, which I'm not mad about. It's wonderful. So all of this stuff. But what I'm trying to do is I think, most of the time when people think American, they think kind of WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And most of the time when people think and talk American, they have something, they have in mind that it is, and I've been personally guilty of this, they have in mind that this is kind of this like totally just disenchanted reality. And I think the thing that I would like people to come away with is this understanding that actually that version of like, I don't know, seminary Protestantism has never really existed on the ground. That what actually exists on the ground in people's homes, in people's houses, especially in those first few hundred years of the colonies, the American Revolution, the Civil War, all that stuff, the First and Second Great Awakenings, that there is an enchanted aspect to all of that. And it has certain things which are impossible for us to get away from as Americans now. But it also, with that, there come certain dangers. And one of the dangers is this constant need to always be converting and to have a conversion story, so that even people who are now deconstructing, they're deconstructing their evangelicalism.
Conversion experience.
It's just another conversion experience. And the question is, well, now that you've deconstructed, what's your next conversion story going to be? And it always ends up being, they either come back to Christianity, or they get into like, I don't know, Buddhism or some other kind of thing. Like there's like this idea that you have a personal spiritual narrative, you have a personal spiritual story that you need to tell, and that if you don't have that, you don't actually really know who you are as a Christian, or you don't really know who you are as an American. I think it's something we need to be a little careful of. And here again, like to talk to my own team, those of us who are converts, we should be careful about this. People ask me for my conversion story a lot, and I try to usually just like give them the highlights and everything. But like you better be more than just that conversion story. At some point the rubber has to hit the road, and we've got to figure out how to actually go deeper into our faith in Jesus Christ. So,
All right, Deacon Seraphim, thank you. Next one, we're gonna keep going, and
I
it gets
promise
weirder.
next time we'll get into the weirder
It's
stuff
been
next
getting
time.
weirder, so let's see how weird we can get.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.